What your job is now.
It's 1:19, so we might start. Welcome everybody to this very important innovation seminar held on behalf of ReGen and SHARC and APSU. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet here today, and pay my respects to the elders past and present and to all future generations. On that note, I'd like to invite Ron Briggs up here to do an official welcome.
My name is Ron Briggs. I'm the Senior Aboriginal Cultural Advisor here at ReGen, obviously CCS, Children's Protection Society. My father's a Yorta man up near Shepparton. My mother's Mara, which is up near Warrnambool. And I'd just like to stand on the land on behalf of ReGen. I'd like to on the land of Running people, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. Also pay my respects to everybody in this room's professionalism. Thank you.
Just reminded me of very important now. I didn't introduce who I was. So I'm Lawrence Dallas, I'm the CEO of United Care ReGen. And can I say that we're really pleased to be delivering this year's seminar in partnership with both APSU and SHARC. Official duty, I'd actually like to welcome Bella Anderson, who is here in SHARC. Now come up and say a few words.
Hello, my name's Bella, and I'm yes, the acting CEO of SHARC. Normally Heather Pickard would be here, and she's incredibly stylish and fabulous. And I'm hoping that I can Oh, I won't be able to live up to that, really. I'm going to read this introduction because I want to get this right. Look, really, what I'd like to just say is that not only is consumer participation important, but it can actually move mountains. SHARC, the organisation I work for, is an extraordinary example of this. So just to fill you in, I'll tell you a little bit, I'll just see some friends up the back, a little bit about what consumer participation can do for an organisation. SHARC Addiction Resource Centre, the history of it was that the very first organisation was called the Understanding and Support Society, which was actually developed by consumers. A group of consumers got together. They saw that there was a need for safe, supported accommodation for people wanting to recover from substance dependency. They organised themselves and they started the society. That ran for quite a number of years. The next organisation that I want to speak briefly about is SHARC, which was the Self-Help and Substance Use Project, which was an umbrella organisation for drug self-help groups based on harm minimisation. It provided health education, promotion and facilitation of self-help therapeutic approaches and practical support. What happened is that those organisations, and if I just backtrack to the US Society, not only was it started by consumers, but it was, and so it was peer-led, but all the people that worked for that organisation were, so it was peer-led and the services were peer-driven. So it was really quite extraordinary. What happened through changes of government as things happen, those two organisations merged and became SHARC. And so SHARC took the expertise of the service delivery by peers, for peers, and the expertise in the advocacy, training and research side of SHARC and formed SHARC. And we have developed, and let me read from this, a really unique process of drug and alcohol service delivery, so we're still in that, for service users and families affected by substance use. We're very proud of that. And we combine really high quality services, education, advocacy and research. Fabulous organisation, APSU. So APSU is the service arm of SHARC. APSU ensures that consumers' opinions and ideas contribute to service provision, policy research and development. So suffice to say, SHARC is built on peer support, peer leadership and peer advocacy. And we know that not only does it work, but it really is a gold standard. Certainly consumer participation at all those levels is a gold standard for us. I really look forward to hearing from all the speakers today and seeing the presentations about consumer essential element of our sector.
Thanks, Bella. I think just as Bella says, there's certainly a long history of former consumers taking up services and achieving meaningful participation. But we still have a real challenge before us in terms of getting the views and ideas of people, not only use services, but people who use services, into modern policy. And I think that's shown by the fact that today that one of the major issues we have at the policy level is this whole debate around drug use should be viewed as a health issue, and for all those years it's always been viewed as a justice issue, but slowly we're slowly turning, or hopefully turning the tide where it's becoming a health issue as it should be. So again, Bella stole a bit of my thunder here in terms of, I was going to say we too, I'm looking forward to learning from examples of good practice discussed today and recognising what gaps there are in our own practices as services that operate in this field, and how we can keep improving to ensure that people who use our services continue to play a central role in their planning, delivery and review. As it is today and should be, I'm going to hand over to Tori, who is going to. But before I do that, there is a couple of announcements as housekeeping that I need to make. Social media. We would really encourage people to use social media while today's seminar is going on. Please use the hashtag AOD16 in your posts, and join the live Twitter discussion and mention the Twitter wall. See, I don't know what that is. I have to be honest there. I know what hashtag Twitter is, but Twitter wall, that's the Twitter wall. Okay, there you go. So that's where your post will come up and we'll go through. We are providing live videos today, so for the sake of the online audience, I'm asking questions to use the microphone, and footage will be available after the seminar on ReGen's YouTube channel. And for the online audience, you're welcome to submit questions for the speakers. You can see the information linked on the video on YouTube for details on how you can send us your questions. Photos, all of our speakers have been consented, is used in promoting and reporting on today's seminar, but please keep in mind that we do have consumers in the audience who have not given such consent if you're taking or publishing any pictures. Morning tea will be a short break in the middle of the seminar because we have a packed program, so please be back on time. Toilets, go through this door, turn right, turn left, turn right, and you're there. There's 4 toilets, so you'll find them anyway, they're listed. So I'm going to be able to acknowledge that we've got quite a number of ReGen's consumer consultants playing a variety of roles today. And it is terrific to see consumers who have used AOD services continuing to take the lead in initiatives across the service network, particularly in making sure that their voices are heard, such as this one. As I said before, Tori will be our MC today. Tori has been undertaking the consumer participation activities at ReGen since mid-2015. After completing the consumer participation training, she went on to administer the North and West Metro AOD Services Client Satisfaction Survey at ReGen's Coburg site to assist many people with their queries relating to service use, as well as collecting the survey data. Tori was also the first person who has used ReGen to present at the ReGen New Southeast Catalyst Program in Narrawarrah. Shared her experience of using the Catalyst Program in local media coverage and presented her insights and challenges facing women in AOD at ReGen's International Women's Day event. She is currently completing a report on her findings from the survey of consumers' experience of welcome conducted at ReGen's Coburg site over the last 2 months. So I would like you all to welcome Tori today.
Thank you very much for that. Good morning, everyone. If everyone can make sure their phones are on silent, please, or turned off, that would be. So thank you, Bella, for that. That was lovely. And I have heard from a lot of the participants that they're very happy with SHARC. A lot of family and friends have gone there and they found it extremely helpful, and it's really helped the participants in their recovery. What we're going to be doing today is we will be having questions after everyone's finished speaking, but we do have to make sure that we stay on schedule. We have a lot to get through, and there will also be time for questions at the end, and after the morning tea break as well. So, if anyone doesn't, as already mentioned, if anyone doesn't get the opportunity to ask a question or comments, you can use the hashtag IAOD16. And there does need to be ongoing discussion that will be discussed today, and you can also be on the website for any you may need as well. So first of all, we have Professor Carla Treloar, who is Deputy Director for the Centre of Social Research in Health from the University of New South Wales. This is the consumer participation in drug treatment services and overview of the Australian research. Carla is the head of the Centre's hepatitis research team. Her research interests are in the fields of hepatitis C and injecting drug use, which is obviously very, very important in this sector. She's primarily a qualitative researcher and is grounded in the disciplines of health and social psychology as well as in public health. Constantly seeks to work and disciplines. In particular, she sees it is essential to work towards blending the insights that an individual-based discipline like health psychology can provide when issues such as hepatitis C abuse are considered in social, legal and political contexts. So if you could please join me in thanking Carla.
Okay, that introduction was just a little bit too long. Thanks very much for the invitation to be here today. It's such a terrific time and consumer participation. And I'm in the privileged position of being able to be on the outside of it in some ways. I'm not a service provider and I'm not a service user in this space. But I do have the opportunity and the privilege to work alongside organisations which are attempting consumer participation. External view of that. So to talk about research today, am I going to click it? No? No. Aha! So I'm going to talk about 4 projects that we've had as had the privilege to work in partnership with UNSW. And there's some really fantastic reports on these that I've got at the end of the presentation that you can download for free from the website. And if you're interested in any of the papers from these academic papers, please just contact me and I can send them on to you. 2 projects were done with us and AWOL, and we published these about 2008. Absolutely is a bit old, but I'm not sure that there's been so much change in the drug and alcohol sector that these findings become relevant. And what we were trying to do was map out to what extent are consumer participation projects happening, and what do staff and what do clients think about them. And so through this presentation, just for ease, I'm going to use the words client, service user, consumers interchangeably, just so we don't get stuck on a bit of a boring track from me. The second 2 projects are our evaluations of AWOL and then NUA, the New South Wales Drug User Organisations, efforts to encourage services to run consumer participation projects. So the AWOL one had 5 projects across 3 states, and so the 3 projects. So we're going to talk a bit about what happened there. So there's lots of definitions of consumer participation, and I'm sure you've come across some of them. And this is the one we chose, which comes from the Quon Department of Health. So consumer participation is the consumers about health service planning, policy development, setting priorities, and quality issues in the delivery of health services. And what's really important is that we're thinking about consumer participation in the delivery of the design and delivery of services at that higher level, not at individuals' treatment programs or experiences within the service. We're really thinking about decisions of planning and delivery of services. Now, of course, involvement in services is variable from the very low levels of suggestion boxes right through to high levels of consumers involved in staff recruitment and training. And so we use this ladder, which I'll refer to quite a lot, of low level to high level activities. So the high level activities are things like consumer participation being incorporated into an organisation's mission, rights charter. The consumer reps are involved in planning committees, staff meetings, staff appraisal, staff recruitment. At the mid-level, consumers are involved in staff training and the development of resources. And at the lower levels, consumers are supported to conduct their own groups or have forums or councils or satisfaction surveys or suggestion boxes and so on. The main thing is this higher level participation where consumers are involved in setting the agenda of the service and the delivery of services. So in our first bit of work with AWOL, we conducted a survey of services across these 3 states, New South Wales, Victoria and WA. So we took a random sample of services from a national register. and we're looking at pharmacotherapy, residential detox. We had a pretty high rate of response from service providers. We sent them a survey after we'd run them up and got the nursing unit manager equivalent on board, and we got about 3/4 of those people completing our survey. And we also asked consumers from a selection of those services to complete this survey too. So first we asked, what is it that services do in consumer participation? And I'll come back to the Charter of Rights, but we had not many services doing higher levels of consumer participation and higher numbers of services doing lower levels of consumer participation. So 20% having consumers sitting on decision-making committees compared with 64% conducting surveys of consumers. Charter of Rights sits out as not quite in that pattern, with high numbers of services having a consumer Charter of Rights. And this might be tied to accreditation processes. So I think that's a bit of something we need to recategorise in that level of high to low activities. What do consumers know about these things though? Do they know that these consumer participation projects happen? So none of the consumers were aware of those high level activities, that there were consumer reps on decision-making activities in the survey. Higher numbers were new of complaints processes, suggestion boxes and surveys. So what do we take from that? You know, at the time, this is about 2007, there wasn't really a strong policy direction or funding for consumer participation projects. So it's encouraging that there was, to the extent that there was, and that there was a small minority where consumers were really involved in those higher level activities. But for consumer participation to work, it's critical that consumers know these things are going on. And it's really concerning that there were complaints processes in their services, for example. In this data, residential services were somewhat better at making consumers aware than pharmacotherapy services. It is really pleasing that it was so highly visible and in services. And it's turning that into practice, turning those principles into practice. So, implementing consumer participation projects is highly dependent on the opinions and beliefs of those involved, the clients and the staff. The health system is built on this notion of a patient, to use that term, as being needy or sick or unwell or pathological. And in work on the mental health field where consumer participation is a little bit more advanced, quite a bit more advanced than drug and alcohol treatment. Of psychiatrists and patients characterise patients as passive and lacking ability. So in validating people's agency or their abilities or their kind of self-motivation in the drug treatment sector, in other literature which positions those seeking treatment for drug and alcohol services as deficient, defective or lacking. And this might underpin the low levels of high consumer participation activities that we saw. So it's really important then to explore in more detail providers. So we surveyed them. So I'll step you through this graph. So in the, that's supposed to be purple. In the darker colour is the responses from providers, and in the lighter colour, which is supposed to be a really nice line green, I didn't really got that. That's so when we ask them to the extent that, what extent do they agree or strongly agree to these statements down the bottom, that service quality would be improved, that clients' opinions were engaged with, that consumer reps should be on committees, that services should hold open meetings to get consumers' views, generally not interested in participating in such things, and staff want clients to be involved. And we saw some interesting patterns here. So on the first three, there's really high levels of agreement with those statements. Service quality would be improved, consumer reps should be on committees, and services should hold open meetings. Because it's a negative, a negatively worded statement that clients are generally not interested. And kind of middling agreement that staff want clients to be involved. But the differences of opinions come where the slides have been boxed. So more strongly agree that consumer reps should be used than just staff. And staff are more likely to agree with this statement that staff want clients to be involved, which indicates that consumers feel that staff don't want them to be involved to a more extent. that okay? It's a bit of a double negative working there. Okay, so then we asked, well, how willing would you be in future to run consumer participation projects in your service? And again, we've got the providers and the consumers' point of view. So we have from the left the high levels, consumer reps involved in staff recruitment, staff decision-making committees, staff training, developing resources, council forums, surveys and suggestion boxes. So from high levels on the left to lower levels on the right, and providers and consumers. So we've got kind of a nice gradation going across the page. And again, if we look at differences between staff and consumers boxed up here, consumers being definitely or probably willing for consumer reps to be involved in staff recruitment, meaning that staff are less favourably viewing consumers on staff recruitment. Similar pattern for consumer reps involved in staff appraisal training. So it seems we've got a high demand from the consumers than from the staff. In the interest of time, I'm just going to talk about the top bits of this next two slides, where we asked what were their three top reasons, and this is for the high levels for the providers. So providers indicated to these varying percentages that staff were reluctant to have consumers involved on decision-making committees, that it wasn't practical to do that, and clients lacked the necessary skills to be involved. When we look at the consumers' response, the clients or the service users or participants' response on this high level at the top, the answers are quite clear. That clients feel it might not be their place to be involved on decision-making committees, that they don't have the necessary skills, believe that nothing would happen anyway, they're too busy, they don't feel confident to do this, and blame for the wrong decisions of those clients. So the implications of this little bit of data also walk away from that. Almost all providers and consumers believe in the principles of consumer participation, and a large proportion would be willing to be involved. Providers' concerns could be informed by this idea I mentioned before of the passive patient in Western health systems. In particular, people who use alcohol and drugs are lacking or in need of fixing and therefore not really ready to be consumer reps. In countering that, the mental health literature on high levels of consumer participation show that when it happens, both providers and consumers develop more positive views about consumers in these higher level roles and become more favourable to including them. So we shouldn't let unwillingness measures defeat us on this. I think it's really important to acknowledge that consumers were concerned about their role, some of the tensions that could arise for them in taking on consumer representation roles, that they could be seen to be colluding with the providers or the service in what might be a tense atmosphere. The desire, of course, to focus on their own treatment and what's best for them as they define it. So now I'm going to move to our evaluation of the demonstration projects by ABLE. So they won a contract from the Commonwealth Government to support 5 services with real cold hard cash, $9,000 participation projects. So they ran an EOI process across the 3 states, New South Wales, Victoria, WA. The services to propose something with these kind of principles, that it had to be a high level consumer participation project, not the suggestion box type thing, but a high level one. Focused on sustainability. Consumer participants had to be paid for what they did. They had to guarantee that there'd be no adverse outcomes for those who got involved, consumers who got involved. And the plan had to be clear and have a time frame and be well worked on. They had an ongoing liaison throughout, and they encouraged the services to contact the local drug user organisation in their state for training and support. And it involves 3 opiate substitution, 1 outpatient detox and 1 resi rehab program across the 3 states. So that I'll show again has a huge amount of detail on what those projects actually were. They're quite different in the 5 sites and local needs. So I'm not going to go into what each particular project did then, but you can read all about it in the ABLE's report. But part of our focus was on the organisational context, the really boring stuff of the bureaucratic processes, the staffing arrangements, resourcing, and mechanisms for enabling clear and timely feedback to consumers. So there's evidence from the UK where user involvement is mandated for drug and alcohol services. The treatment service and the user groups can bundle and complement on these organisational issues. So we thought it was a really interesting thing to focus there. And, you know, to be fair, services are doing this in an environment where there's very little guidance for them on how to do this or policy frameworks to support them. The question was, were these services fit for purpose for consumer participation? And we interviewed key staff and key consumers and general staff and general consumers at 2 time points, about when the project started and about 6 months later. So we wanted to talk to people who were centrally involved in doing this project and those who are not centrally involved but should be aware of what's going on in their service. The stability and core business came up a lot in these interviews. And at the baseline, it was all focused on the consumer. Are the consumers ready to do this work? And the types of discussions varied by whether the service was a harm reduction or an abstinence service. Notions were focused on what the consumer needs for training. There was not much discussion of what the staff might need or the service might need for getting ready and progressing and maintaining these projects. And there was perhaps some comment on that staff might need some attention to their attitude. So these male staff saying, well, maybe we should just be a bit more open to try and see how it goes. That staff identified were threat to their role as staff members. And sorry, the formatting has dropped off the end of this last quote, but the first one says, staff may not think consumer participation because maybe it's a power thing. Some staff feel they should have more power than the clients, which is bubbled up on the slide here. It says some staff think it's quite intimidating to think that members of that client group are going to have access to us at a level where they're not on the other side of the counter. So that was its baseline. The story was really different, and still the notions of stability and core business were there, but it was all about the stability of the service. None of the projects, reached their goals. And the stories, even though the projects were very different, the stories of what happened were pretty similar. Staff leaving, no handover, other things becoming more important, not being able to maintain the focus, energy and effort on consumer participation. So this quote put it all together. And, you know, he's kind of apologising, this male staff member. I have to be perfectly honest here, it's not gone smoothly. We've had a succession of people being the prime mover, and as people leave or are seconded or lose interest, hands the person, which meant that the project didn't get to its goals. The notion of consumer participation being non-core business was a big talk in the staff. That non-core business tends to be not well resourced or planned, and particularly when there's other non-core business happening at the same time. The drug user organisation provided training to consumers. None of the services took up training for staff. The consumers' understanding of consumer participation tended to be higher. Identified it at 6 months later were very different from baseline again. It was all talk about the delays of remuneration to the consumer reps and the hassles that it caused in the service. But these types of things, the rocky nature of these projects were unfair to the consumer reps and playing with their emotions. They'd entered in good faith and had high expectations, and things hadn't happened. You know, staff identified the impact possibly of that on the self-worth and the trust of their consumer reps. So the implications of this evaluation project from this perspective, not reach their goals in the time frame. We could kind of confidently say that staff had underestimated the time and the commitment that would be required and didn't see a need for their training or preparation at baseline. Thinking a little bit differently, this notion, this focus at the beginning on the perceptions of consumer stability gets back to this idea of the relationship between staff attitudes and the success of consumer participation. Research where service user involvement is mandated in drug and alcohol services, that failings of the user groups were perceived stereotypes that people who use drugs were unable to perform effectively, And the organisational factors that may have contributed to that were not, may not be considered. It's also important to note again that consumer reps are put in a they choose to protest. And from other literature, we know that clients can see their access to treatment as fragile and that they could be subject to punitive responses if they express their distress or dissatisfaction. So in Hagel's report, they put out a number of recommendations that there should be training and capacity building for management and staff prior to these types of projects, that they should be adequately resourced, that there should be commitment from all levels of the service to valuing and involving consumers, and that engagement with local drug use organisations was important. I think, you know, this kind of reading these interviews day after day after day, that consumer participation is a really highly complex social beast, and there's many factors going on. And we have to acknowledge in drug and alcohol services in particular that the power imbalances and reliance on stereotypes which may characterise what staff's attitude to consumers might be. And indeed that the burden of consumer participation might be too much for those with least power to control their own treatment. Point to end on that slide, but we'll push on. So now I'll turn to the final element, which was a similar project conducted by the New South Wales Drug Users Group Neua, working with 3 services that were spread across metro and regional areas, STs and 1 NGO Resi Rehab. So they picked up some of the lessons from the APSU project, and they had a dedicated worker who would kind of circle these 3 services throughout the life of the project and try to provide some troubleshooting and ongoing support. Again, I won't go into detail, but there was a whole lot of things that the services chose to do and drawn from local needs. And some of these evolved over time. One service used their consumer participation project to develop a CPR and naloxone training after a couple of tragic overdoses. The action plan remained the same. We interviewed the key staff and key consumers and general staff and general consumers at the beginning of the project. And so at the beginning, at baseline, there was lots of talk of the notion that consumers were disenfranchised with the service, but more so from society, really. And how could a consumer participation project work in this setting with clients who feel this way? So Ashley, and of course their fake names, as a general staff member saying, I think clients are confused. They don't really know what consumer participation means. I think the ones that do know what it means don't really trust that there'll be much of an outcome, disenfranchised, and never really had much of a say in their treatment. But there was some pleasing levels of enthusiasm for consumer participation, for the idea of having the opportunity to speak and have your voice heard is recognised. So Jason, as a consumer, saying, I think the more the staff hears about problems, like the everyday problems that come in here, you are a human. Which I think we might just stop a moment and think about what that means if he is really much they would need to be recognised as a human. What does that mean? His everyday experience is like. So this process of being involved in the consumer participation project enabled some change, and particularly I'm going to focus on the staff-client consumer interactions. So the changing nature of communications, removing it from routine communication to something different and new, allowed people to see that us and them don't kind of be challenged, working together on something that both groups value. Jerry, as a general staff member, to know the real stories about them, their true worries, instead of just asking the routine questions and answering our questions. That's different from the normal way of communicating between us. And Robin, as a key consumer, staff have been pretty positive. They're pretty open. It's like everybody's working towards one thing. So seeing the staff as staff, that they are people as well. So it's sort of breaking down the humanness or elevating the humanness on both sides of the counter. Question played out a game of levelling the playing field and some reorienting the power relations. So that there used to be an us against them, us against them. Now we're on the same playing field. And Elle, as a key staff member, it was quite nice to sit in a room as equals and have discussions. I was most surprised about how much of an interest consumers were taking. Shifts of how staff are able to see clients and clients are able to see staff. And Susan, as a key consumer, I think has created a level playing field. Gives people a little bit of power, pride even, that being able to speak and not running against brick walls all the time, that someone listens to you openly and freely. So, heading towards the end, the implications from this project run in New South Wales was that we could see consumer participation having positive comments, positive impacts on staff, service user interactions and relationships that disrupted this routine asking the same questions, different ways to speak to each other and different ways to know each other. People talked about it being a doorway into another world, generating alternative forms of this interaction engagement and new subject positions for the service user and the staff based on real and authentic communication, seeing each other as people, not just identity categories of staff or client. So, some concluding thoughts here, because again, I don't have to do this stuff. This is your job. But what can we glean from this data that might be helpful to you? Consumer participation is a really complex intervention. And I think these last two projects have shown that organisationally and socially. Services might be underprepared and not realise what they need to do to get ready. Not aware of the challenges they need to address in their own systems to run projects or support them. Consumer reps can be put into situations that increase their risk and vulnerabilities, and I think that's really important to not forget about in the alcohol and other drug services. That the impact on services and change can be driven through these different communications and differing relationships that are enabled. But training, planning and support is essential. So good luck with your endeavours. Whatever our research can do to help you, we're very happy to pass on resources or papers or reports, so please do be in touch.
Thank you so much for that. If you would like to stay here for a second, do we have any questions? Anyone? Okay, I'll have one. Do you have some sort of information about the diversity of the people who are in those studies?
Yeah, good. So maybe I'll answer that by saying the diversity of people who were acting as consumer representatives. And, you know, that's a really, so many parts of this project are so complex. So many parts of consumer participation are so complex. And who is a consumer rep? So in some services, in some of these last two projects, the service chose the consumer rep, and they may have had consumer experience in other fields, but not alcohol and drug treatment. In other services, the clients chose their consumer rep in a variety of different ways. So that in itself creates whole different dynamics of who's on board, who's the kind of key person, and then who's the key staff person that that consumer has to involve, or should be kind of key communicating with. And those kind of, on a protocol, here's the best way to do it. It really has to be a clever, sophisticated thinking through of what is going to work best for this service, this client group, this staff group, and monitored in an ongoing way to ensure that you can represent the diversity of consumers used. That you haven't got a consumer who only has and doesn't consult with other people who can't do it, or you've got a staff member on the other side who really is focused on clinical care and not community throughput. So other stuff is really difficult, complex stuff, and there is no one easy checklist for it. Sorry.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, sorry. Sorry, just hang on a second. Just wait for the so that we can hear it online.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, look, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. And I was really interested in the fact that it wasn't until the second project that the focus was really on the parent staff. That kind of idea that you can just sell people in, train the consumers because they're the people who need the training. I noticed with the newer one, you were saying that they actually did some staff training. Is that training material available? I'd be really interested to have a look at that.
Yeah, so they ran 1 day of consumer training separately, 1 day of staff training separately, and 1 day where the two groups were together. So the contact viewer, that's their project belongs to them.
Yes. Yeah, so I don't know if I missed it, but when did ReGen decide to start integrating consumer participants? 2006. I'll be talking about that. Oh, I'm interested to know how long it's been going on.
Yeah, sure.
Progress. So you'll get all that, all right?
Anybody else? No questions? All right, thank you very much. I have to say, I do find that very, very interesting. And I do feel privileged to say that I actually haven't seen those negative aspects of the consumer participation with ReGen. Thank you mainly to Regina, amazing here. So highly recommend it to anyone here who hasn't or wants to get involved in it. I also think the validation of the consumers is a huge point with this, because if you don't feel that you're going to be respected for, speaking up, giving your voice, then you're not going to do it. So I think it's fantastic what you guys are doing, and yeah, thank you so much. So next, we're going to talk to two people from APSU, the Association of Participating Service Users. First up, we have Gavin, who is the manager of APSU. He was appointed as the manager in February 2012, has over 14 years experience in community-based AOD treatment. Jeff has a postgrad diploma in community sector management, a diploma in alcohol and other drugs, and a certificate in business administration. Jeff's interest and passion for genuine and meaningful participation is derived from a combination of a lived experience as youth, working in the AOD sector, and also, unfortunately, having lost family members to substance misuse. So please join me in welcoming.
Opportunity to present. APSU engages and supports consumers across the state of Victoria. I'll start out first of all by saying when I mention consumers, I'm talking about family members as well. So to avoid that whole service user, consumer, family member, client, we just refer to them as consumers. So first of all, I'll start off by describing a little bit about what APSU is. So APSU is the, sorry, I need that, don't I? APSU stands for the Association of Participating Service Users, to the representative body of the Self-Help Addiction Resource Center, SHARC, which is what we referred to before. APSU draws guidance and direction from a think tank, which is made up of mostly consumers. Membership is free, and both consumers and service providers are encouraged to join. Our current membership is around 450 consumers, 200 service providers in Victoria. There are some consumers that are from other states as well, and international as well. APSU's mission is threefold, as you can see up here. Collaboratively with key stakeholders to increase consumer participation in treatment, in drug treatment and care provider systems, to increase service user impact on relevant policy development, implementation at a local, state, and national level, and to promote, encourage, and assist service users in the development of service user-run programs and activities at a local level. So let's have a look at some of the tools, models, and activities and initiatives APSU has to realize this mission. We'll start with the Peer Model Manual. The Peer Model Manual is made up of 3 parts. Peer Helper Training, which is designed to provide training opportunities for people who experience AOD issues and want to participate as consumers in the AOD sector. Peer Helper Training allows people who have had a disrupted education to test the waters, whilst increasing their skills and knowledge levels to become a peer helper. This setting provides an opportunity to network with peers, and at the same time to be able to have open, honest discussions in a safe and confidential environment. It's usually 8 days over a 3-week period. It's been described as a snapshot of the Cert 4 in AOD, and there's a voluntary 12-hour placement at the end of the training program. That the value of peer helpers in the AOD sector is immense and often quoted as a necessary part of recovery for AOD treatment consumers. Consumers are less likely to feel judged or stigmatized by those who share similar experience. The relationship is built on common knowledge and shared experiences. Oops, sorry. The next one is Experts by Experience. While Experts by Experience was formed in 2005, it was made up of graduates of peer helper training, and has since evolved a little bit, and it consists of done the peer helper training, but also people that are becoming involved in newly emerging advisory committees or working groups, whatever the case may be. The training consists of advocacy, leadership skills, facilitation, and organization skills, as well as the principles of empowerment. So it's kind of the next step up, the next level, for those people that want to be involved with at a higher level. We often use Experts by Experience training for emerging advisory groups, like I said before. We have a speaker bureau. Speaker bureau has been around for a little while, but it's been revised as of late. And that was in support with the APSU think tank. There were new guidelines developed, policy and procedures, as well as a 4-hour training session that was provided for that. APSU Speaker Bureau members is comprised of people who are willing to speak publicly at forums, meetings, presentations, conferences, and other community or corporate events. Speaker Bureau members nominate themselves and choose what area of expertise they have and what topics they're prepared to speak about. Members are remunerated as consumer participants, by the requesting organization. The APSU doesn't have funding to pay for consumer consultants or consumer speakers, but there's an expectation that the organization that's requesting the speaker remunerate the speaker appropriately, set with the organization at the time of requesting the speaker. The Speaker Bureau training course includes essential information regarding policies and procedures such as briefing and debriefing, remuneration, and the rights and responsibilities of speakers. We also discussed some basic elements of public speaking, including the importance of preparation, planning, and practice. The session ends with a short practical speaking exercise, and I see some familiar faces in the room, and most of it's very helpful. So that's great. Since revising Speaker Bureau 8 months ago, we currently have 89 registered speakers in our database. 61 of them have completed the training. We have organized 40 separate recorded 4 speakers at the end. The vast majority of evaluations, both present and past, demonstrate that Speakers Bureau be positive and often transformative effect on their audience. The next thing I'd like to talk about is Your Feedback Matters, which is participation in systemic advocacy at the same time. Your Feedback Matters was established in order to learn about the experiences of consumers accessing and using alcohol and drug treatment services in Victoria. This is post-reform. It has a means to also advocate for system change. APSU became a contact point for consumers to provide feedback on the perspective and experience of the AOD server system. 1-300 number to speak to a trained peer volunteer who will go through the survey with the caller that they may have. Alternatively, they can access the survey online from the APSU website. The survey focuses on the drug treatment system, i.e. access, waiting times, having to repeat their story, etc. For example, participants are asked, reflecting on your experience, how easy or difficult do you feel it was to access a service? The response was 32% found it okay, either difficult or easy, then found it difficult or very difficult, and 21% found it easy or very easy. Another question that was asked was, why did you find it difficult? Reported that it took too long. 20% said that the system was complex, hard to navigate, and 20% said there was a lack of information. Another example is how many times did you have to tell your story or repeat your information in order to get the assistance that you needed? And this is not including in a primary health care practice. 71% respond times they had to repeat their story. 21% responded once, and 7% indicated more than 5 times. What we end up with is a snapshot of people's perceptions and experiences accessing AOD services in Victoria. We can apply filters to extract specific catchment-based responses by service users, family members, whoever's doing the survey. We ask those questions. Those responses to drill down and see where a particular need is overall. What we are finding is that much of the feedback aligns with what we already learned from the aspects review of the new arrangements for the community support services and drug treatment services. And so we're pleased that it's process with aspects around this initiative, but it's pleasing to know that feedback from a broad range of consumers across the state. So we encourage service providers to continue and promote this, to see that when I walked in the door, the first thing I saw was the Your Feedback Matters postcards up on the board at ReGen, so that was fantastic. We encourage we encourage service providers to promote the number and the website if that's the preferred option, and we encourage consumers to provide feedback. Next, consumer participation, straight from the source. I think majority of people have seen this manual. It's attributed to Regina and Miriam Clark. Since its establishment in 2000, APSU has been collaborating with AOD services across the state, as well as the Victorian Department of Health, to increase consumer participation within the sector. This work has been fruitful. However, there's still a long way to go. Although APSU's initial focus within consumer participation was on service users, the family members and significant others have an equally important wealth of knowledge deriving from the impact of relatives or friends' alcohol and drug use. This experience is often different users, and thus family participation deserves attention in its own right, while remaining under the banner of consumer participation. And at this time, I'm pleased to be able to present to the sector and to everyone here the Fostering Family Participation, brought in the source manual, which is a guide for the service sector in fostering family member participation in drug and alcohol services. On the existing practices of consumer participation by exploring opportunities for family members to be involved in priority setting, policy development, education, training, research planning, and service delivery in the AOD sector treatment sector. Consumer participation, and by extension, family participation, social inclusion, and the democratic right remains in its infancy in the AOD sector. It is increasingly encouraged in policy, program guidelines, and quality tools. The tools and evidence presented in this manual have a strong and independent voice for family members in the AOD sector through the mechanism of family participation. APSU hopes that this manual will garner broad support from the sector in fostering. And at this time, I introduce Marg, Quon, who is going to have a little chat about what it's like to participate as a family member in the drug and alcohol sector. And basically, Marg's training.
Oh, I didn't know that. Sorry, on that. Thank you. Am I tall enough to talk? Thanks, Jeff. I joined Family Drug Help in 2003
son that was heavily involved in drug use, and that Jeff made was that often the family's experience is quite different to the user's experience, and experience and my experience were very, very different. He was having a wonderful time and I wasn't. So, there are quite distinct differences. Family Drug Help has become a program of SHARC, and I joined to participate as a member of the support group, and then ended up in the support group. I've had wonderful family participation, being involved in a whole range of areas of the organisation and different programs, and Carla was able to, I wish we'd spoken yesterday, because then I would have been able to sort a lot of my thinking. Talked about having high level, mid and low level participation. At high level, I suppose, as chairperson of the advisory committee, I have an input in the terms of references that are written, so we write those in. That was a little task. We also are able to feed in and inform to the board of ideas and programs. We've participated in the development of by focus groups, being able to be involved in focus groups, initially discussing, what that looked like and the participation might look like for family members. We participated in some of the editing, some of the language that was used as well. There was argument about whether it be family or significant other or us. It's, everyone that's there involved with it. So at that high level, we were to participate quite a lot. I've been involved in interviewing staff, new staff coming on, so as a family participant, helping write the key selection criteria. So at this very point, I'm feeling very blessed that I've been able to participate so much in so many things. I also training for the volunteers on our helplines and our support groups. So I do some drug education around that. And I've also facilitated my own support group for quite a few years. Sadly, in all of that process, my son did die from a drug overdose, and that left me hanging a bit, thinking, well, now I don't belong because, I'm no longer a family member. But beautifully, Family Drug Help SHARC were so inclusive that from the position that we were in the advisory committee, we were able to push and drive for the supper club. It's for family members who've lost a child, because as you know, there's so much silence around those deaths. And from that also be able to drive to have the overdose day recognised and which is a beautiful day set up as well. So the involvement has been able to be ongoing. And then one of the things that particularly as a family member we were really driven by was to give a voice to families, so that the stereotyping and the stigma could be changed, that we too were valued members of the world, just as our children were. And so we wanted to give a voice to families. And here in a partnership with the Shire of Yarra Ranges, they provided the support group with a community grant, which was fantastic. Family Drug Help supported us, SHARC, with some money. We were able to employ an art teacher who thought to himself, what I got myself into here. So there were probably 15 families who were being given art lessons, and from that we did an art exhibition, held that at, and we've also held it at SHARC Family Drug Help as well. And it was our expression of what we were going through. And then there was the Smart Art program. That was us as family members who provided us with a writing teacher. We were able to then produce a whole range of writing about our experiences, give a voice to what we were going through. And then I've actually got a copy of it there. I sort of look back and thought, you did really well with that. But just being able to have our extended family members and community hear what it was like for us was so valuable, you know, and that participation. And then it linked more people into the organisation, and you were aware of services that were available to these children as well. We then, you know, began the ICE forum, so that was driven out of the advisory committee. And our advisory committee is set up of 6 family members, 8 professionals. So we set up the first of those. I've been able to attend a lot of training as well, which has been really wonderful out of SHARC, that I can be sent off and asked if I'd like to be involved in things that I can then bring back into organisations or different places. In the long term, you know, if I look at it, you know, I wasn't particularly well when the son was going through everything and considered unemployable, no capacity to work. Later today, I'll do drug driving here. So, you know, with family participation being valued and held, you can get your own life back and reclaim it. So, you know, I think it's a really two-way to be able to participate and strengthen yourself so that you're strong enough to deal with what you have to. I've been able to submit to the Civil Commitments Act, which I've never heard of before, but anyway. So I've been able to provide a submission to that and to GPs about the difficulties for someone needing to use the pharmacotherapies, you know, getting into the chemist, all that sort of stuff. Off the program because your mother's there with you. So being able to talk to them about how to run the program better. So in many ways, I think I've been very blessed to be, you know, welcomed into that family and being able to, in particular, developing this. So, thank you.
Marg, and I'll just wrap it up with, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the family members and service providers who participated in research for this publication, happened without them. And also like to acknowledge the value funding support for this project provided by the Morris Family Trust, Lisa May, Mary Wardell, and Lawrence G. and Jean Brown, charitable trust managed by Perpetual. Thank you.
Do we have any questions, please? Yes. So hang on a second, just wait for the microphone.
This is an opportunity question, but I don't get our hands on it.
Good point.
2 seconds.
When we break for morning tea, they're all out on the table back there. Fabulous. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, we just want to thank you, and I'm so happy that something so beautiful came out of such a tragedy. So
Yes.
it's fantastic to hear. Thank you. Okay, so as Jeff said, if you go to the signing table just at the front there, we do have copies of the boarded in source available there. We're pretty much bang on time. So we're going to have a morning tea break now, but if you could all try to be back here at 11, in your seats by 11 hopefully, and yeah, we'll come back then. I think it was just confusing. When first came to me, he said, I'm like, he questioned that it was great. I thought that's what he said. That's do we have another question should we go and see if I can find that one somewhere? Thank you. Natural.
Yeah, I'm so happy you're doing it like that. Yeah, I know, I've been like so which is not here. So just take all that out. Is someone else going to do it? I'm doing it. Someone else? Yes, I've got one, but someone else is doing it. Richard or online? Oh, I know. I said this is French. We don't even need to ask. I just say yes to everything. Sign me up. Yeah. Good fun. Now I need Yes.
All solved. Right, perfect. Oh, yeah, I saw it. Yeah, thanks.
School program. Yes.
Was that when I was working?
Yes.
I can't remember where
Yes.
long it was. Oh, that's interesting. And how's it all going here?
We're battling with the region. We're trying to avoid it. It's just being regulated through.
It's change. Just it's going to be the way it's
the confrontation process, the issuing from the outset what they want to do. It's just a huge impact on this idea that something creating a mega organisation, a mega agency or something that will improve innovation. It's just, it doesn't work.
That's really interesting. And I've got one ambition, that's my position of chair. Did you know that? Did you know that? Just think when she was really with the CEOs yesterday. She was really with the CEOs yesterday. Not her personally. So the ones from the business and the individuals, strategy as well.
I think that's about trying to circumvent the cut-off opposition.
It's a piece of news. I'm sure we'll see each other at other forums.
Hopefully
Yeah.
we'll be around.
Yeah.
changes that I have. That's the, there's not a whole lot of information. It's more just showing that it's there. Yeah, that's what I'm getting. Now, is it going to be? I'm not sure what we put on there, but that's really just before we get started. So one will be for questions, the other one's for Trevor. The others will be seeing the tables. We'll be taking those out and I'll just be handing it back and forth because it's not, it's very, like going into really narrow range. Yeah, so after Brent, presentation just starts.
I'm not allowed to. Some nights, but the group I've got tonight, which is their second half, beautiful.
This is not so we just get one through the group and you can say it's saving up.
It's an interesting
Years ago, I was coming.
It's got me two more.
That's right.
But yes, back up. And so should I take the?
Should be great.
Where's that? Okay. Yeah. Yes.
What you call a rubber band? I just thought it was like this. That's going to resonate in my head. Yeah. Yes, if you're home, taking what others please. So what happened is that people looked at that and they said, well, this is not
Okay. I'm trying to sorry, I was a bit late. I had to go sort out some angry. Yeah, I know. Sometimes I feel like I'm a teacher. Well, there's a long
All right, everybody. Thank you. Okay, so to get back into it, we'll now be reflecting on the history of consumer participation at ReGen, and we'll be speaking to Joe, who's a consumer participant, and also Regina a bit later. First of all, we have Joe, who's been undertaking the consumer participation since 2013. Activities including the harm reduction care working group, recruitment of other consumer consultants, taking part in the consumer consulting meeting group. She emceed the 2016 International Women's Day event, which was really good. Also, outside of ReGen, Joe served over 2 years on ReGen Consumer and Carer Council, and since the closure of this council, she's collaboratively putting together a publication that narrates the story of this council. And lastly, she's leading peer support groups throughout Melbourne, and I know a few people who do that, and they said that they're absolutely fantastic. So give it a go if you want. So thank you, Joe.
Oh, it's not.
Yeah, it's here.
Hi, everyone.
Before we get started, I just want to give a plug, if that's all right, just to Hassan Nicole, because they actually run consumer participation training for managers, and they have two, one on the 28th, one on the 17th of May, and one on the 28th and 29th of May. The first one is at Carnegie, the second one's in the city. And we're going to be tweeting, I'm going to get Paul to tweet and Facebook the details. Okay, so sorry about that, but okay.
So we're just going to run through, do we need the clicker or?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're just going to run through some slides and have a bit of a chat about consumer participation generally and also mainly here at ReGen. I feel like I want to sing. So my name's Jo, I'm a consumer consultant. So that to me is like often just about being here in the space and participating in stuff here within the agency. So participating in groups, we have meetings, sort of a group of us consumer consultants meet together, maybe once a month or once every 6 weeks-ish. And sort of participating in decision making as well, like when that's invited. But yeah, largely just sort of being here.
I'm Regina. I'm going to continue. I'm the consumer participation facilitator here at ReGen, which generally is about capacity building, building systems, recruiting, building systems, and getting also, encouraging getting staff on board, but also recruiting, mentoring, and training people, and it's a constant process.
Yeah, so how and why? So here at ReGen, there has been, I think a question was asked about this earlier, about the history dating back to 1999 at least, I think, which is when a client participation team was formed, and there was this cool, it did come up on the slide. Yeah, this is a photocopier. So back when, before slideshows and, when things were hard copy and photocopy, we had to, put in a lot of effort to get this onto the slideshow. So yeah, this group was meeting and discussing stuff back then, and I think maybe it sustained itself for a while and maybe ebbed out and has come back implemented now. But yeah, I think that's possibly, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's possibly when the space was first identified.
Yeah, 1999.
99, yeah. So.
And it was a significant group of people when you read through the documents. It's actually, there's a lot of minutes, a lot of letters. There was a space set up for people to come and meet. It was a significant powerhouse, really. It was up to me when I read the documents.
So that's a bit about the how.
Okay, and can I just go to the next slide, Joe? And just want to show this as well. This is the toolkit project, but also ReGen or War then were involved with APSU. So the toolkit was pretty much was sort of the impetus to extract from the source, or the beginning to extract from the source. It was a project with a lot of research, a lot of consultation with consumers. How to, what it's meant to get people services involved in decision making and sensitivity policy and so forth. That's a number of the history, so that was in 2001. I also too, another why is the why, I guess, the ReGen in terms of consumer participation purpose, obviously there's that history there to wanting to have people involved. I don't think it's got to do, that we're talking about history, we're talking about organisational culture, but also too, there were other drivers as well. That is, there was a reform that was coming up. So this is in 2013, and I think that like many of us, ReGen was hoping that probably a bit more of a show around consumer participation in our services in some way, but nonetheless, they were preparing for that.
Okay, so I guess it's already sort of been mentioned, but I think that this is a lot of the rationale behind consumer participation, it being a human rights issue. I think it's well agreed upon that. The people who are accessing this are contributing to that service. I'm sure that other big businesses wouldn't be releasing products or putting stuff out in the market without consulting their consumers. A democratic practice, and I guess that's seen the recruitment of consumers as well. Here at ReGen, we interview and recruit people. Regina sits on the panel and also a consumer as well. Maybe that's not purely democratic or something, but we're not trying to get elected by our peers, but it's in the essence of democracy in that, and also we're representing peers through our experience. And so improved treatment outcomes. Like I said before, I'm sure Apple wouldn't without having feedback first. So
I guess it increases, like it's important to have input from the students to have a good product. Yeah.
So with that, with the with one of the other strategic drivers that we had and changing culture in the organisation, in readiness for consumer participation practice is, of course, the quality innovation, the quick. I can't remember the acronym. You know, that used to be quick stuff, and they changed it to quick. It was important that for ReGen, that which is something about consumer rights or conserving consumer rights, statement number 24. That's actually I can't remember the name of the standard. Sorry, it wasn't number 24, but that was at meet. And in fact, the work that was done is the result of exceeding that standard, which I don't think is a common incident in the alcohol drug sector. Or practice. That's all covered. And then with the capacity building, when we talk about capacity building, meaning getting everyone on board, everyone is invited to the party. So it's about including people at every stage. So of course, essentially, I'm facilitating many of people doing activities here, not just consumers, but also staff. So there's been a new example in an organisation with their own consumers, and it's not driven by myself, and also too that the consumer consultants themselves also advocate and drive activities in the organisation and raise and push for issues that they feel that need to be addressed, and so on and so forth. So it's a capacity building in the spirit of like what we used to, like, you know, the dual diagnosis money, and I really want to remember that sort of practice, setting up policies, building systems, constantly advocating for it.
Yeah. So what is it all about? I think we've heard this quote already today. So I guess personally, I see consumer participation as really when it accesses services, or for me personally, I know that my own input into my treatment plan was sorry.
I'll get out the way.
Yeah, so personally, here at ReGen, my own input into my treatment plan was really encouraged, and it was like the foundation of how my health plan was created. And for me, that was like the initial consumer participation. I think, I'm not sure whether if I hadn't had that experience, whether I'd be interested in coming back into a service later on and like participating as not as a client, but as a consumer. I guess I see the different, like, client and consumer as different things. So yeah, I think that's a part of it for me, to be like held in, like to be built up and encouraged to have a voice as in those early days. Yeah, I see more of the consumer participation now is coming back and continuing on in that journey, and like sharing about my experience during those early days, and doing it in a more like official capacity, or like in meetings and in rooms like this, rather than in those small like counselling rooms. So that's, yeah, also like being able to identify like possible barriers that I faced and barriers that I went through during those early days. Offering my real things from the position of like having that history as a client, and not as perhaps, like, I know a lot of staff members do have that history as well, but more than a decade, and they're institutionalised in a way, whereas I still got that pure, I don't have that influence aspect in my history, so it's a bit different, yeah.
And just to add to the sort of, and sort of what Carla was referring to was the complexity of consumer participation, and there's different domains of consumer participation in, and it is different when we're talking about people entering into decision-making service delivery. It's very different from someone entering into decision-making in their treatment, for example. When we talk about policy development, I mean, that's a complex process, getting people input into policy. It's actually quite difficult to do. It takes a bit of time, and it takes a bit of preparation for us to be able to do that. And things like education, I mean, this is where sort of ReGen's entering in that sphere at the moment. We have an RTO where we are beginning to have people contribute to our training materials, and that's another complexity where there's a lot of, this is work. And Joe would agree with me on this. I'm sure it takes a lot of conversation, doesn't it? It takes a lot of talking about what we do and how we're going to forge ahead, you know, with anything in the beginning. I suppose when we did the recruitment for consumer consultants, Joe and I talked for, we had a lot of talking. Just around the qualities we were looking for, and you know, where we've been fair, where we've been, all that sort of stuff. So I'm saying those conversations there, it takes time for the practices, and also to including and significant others and friends as well, the community that surrounds someone who uses alcohol and drug services, Aboriginal people, people from linguistically diverse backgrounds. There we go. Do you need a second?
Okay, so this is a great slide. This is a great slogan. This slogan is used to communicate the idea that no policy should be decided by any representative and direct participation of members of the group affected by that policy. So it involves national, ethnic, disability-based or other groups that are often thought to be marginalised from political, social and economic opportunities. So yeah, what an awesome, got its histories in Central European political traditions. But yeah, I guess that sort of sums it up in a lot of ways. And it just makes sense. Like I doubt anyone could really argue with the importance of that.
No.
You could try. So yeah, simple but complex. I suppose that slogan makes it seem really simple, and essentially it is a simple concept. Like what the complexity comes from, maybe more of the how part of it.
Yes, definitely. I guess what we were talking about before, it is about you know, the experience here is about organisational change. That the name of the presentation is Transforming an Organisation, and it is about to change. The culture here has changed, essentially. It has changed where consumer participation and those who are undertaking consumer participation activities are the fabric of the organisation, and they're not seen. It's not necessarily to be like a staff member either. It is the term consumer consultant that we use is probably a good term, but it gives that sort of space for people to be sort of the organisation, but not of the organisation in a way. Does that make sense? So like what you're saying, not necessarily having the buy-in of the staff member we want to stay the same, but prepared to act and advocate for change, I think. So I mean, and the complexity is that you have to prepare people for change. You can't just go ahead and just forge ahead and just hope that everyone's going to be happy. That really attention with people. Sometimes people will come in that don't have knowledge of the practice. They don't quite understand their mistakes often. So it's really important that that those conversations and those relationships are built and involve people. So when change does happen, that there's a space to talk about the change and the consequences of that change.
I suppose some of the complexities were highlighted, like in the statistics or the survey that was done, like sort of, I suppose, on more of an emotional or psychological level as well, like the consumers with Do we have valuable stuff to say as staff members who are, you know, do we feel like it's a complex relationship to everyone?
Joe does one, so I know I love it. This is a slide. This is how we show the processes, I guess, at ReGen. I'm sorry, it isn't very good. I'm not very arty. So I guess the thing is about the first thing about communicating the activities to people, that what is going on, and I got that idea from Neami actually, thanks Julie, about making sure that people know that consumer participation is happening and they can involve themselves in activities. So we have an update, for example, about that, and that was the question, so that's clear to people as they walk into the organisation that we do have this purpose. And then that's a constant job of promoting it, yeah? It's a constant job of talking to also for the consumer consultants actually presenting how the scripts and they talk about it as well. Then there are those people who are interested, whether it's a one-on-one conversation or whether it's a good conversation goes into a database. There's now, it's not just at ReGen, but also around the place, like at Peer Helper, for example, or any participation activities or education that will resource them in such a way that they are, you know, coming and input in the working group of ReGen that they have, you know, their knowledge has been born in some way. And then the training, consumer participation training, which Joe has completed, and the agreement have completed. And that also includes, I have one of the consumer consultants present on a session on self-care, which is Richard, and he has some experience in activities. Richard's with Joe on the Southern Regional Council. That's interesting to be part of that participation as well. And we're hoping there'll be more of that at ReGen. And then people undertake the activities, which is working groups, or we'll go over they want the details of that. And they can be recruited as a consumer consultant. Not everyone has to be a consumer consultant. They can, you know, work at what level they want to be, because that is a bit more of an upbeat role. And then consultant meeting. Okay. Sounds all right, doesn't it? These are the activities, this is the shopping list.
Yeah, this is the slide that I prefer.
I'll be running out of time.
Participated in many of these groups. The highlight for me is probably the harm reduction in smoking care working group, which has been amazing for me personally. Like, it's an ongoing project, and it's I won't go into too much details, but the next slide sort of shows. This is another one Regina put together. I suppose
well, I've got better was. So this is sort of the relationship. So the point of the slide, and I'm sorry for the bad slide, the point of the slide is that the community group are connected. They're not like something far off organism out in space on planet Mars that no one knows about. We can actually connect it up to the different many groups at ReGen. So that was the point of that slide. So the systems we were talking about before, you can see that there's quite a few policy documents that need to be altered or developed. And you can see that staff orientation policy is part of that as well. Also, the strategic plan. Lots of policies. So yeah, here at ReGen there's just been created like an consumer consultant, so that's really nice to have a place to go, a place to be in the physical building. I think there's a computer, not a typewriter. There's a computer and like phone and stuff like that. Nice. And it's still, and it's the point of that slide is that it's still it's developing, it's still going, so we're still trying to improve the practice here. It doesn't remain the same. There's still areas that we want people to actually have and there's moving up higher in the chain of the whole farm government there at ReGen, which is fantastic. Another thing that we probably need to point out, it does take money to do this. We do reimburse people $25 an hour for that inside. Just forgot to put that in, but it does. This does take a budget, so which is we need to put a budget line in your funding submissions. That's the budget information. Really, it's the only.
And I think that's bringing us to the end. We've got some further resources, so if anyone wants to access that.
There's another slide.
And yes, the resources.
We've run out of time, so sorry.
Any questions?
Yes. It's probably not strong this one, but in order to get involved with this, when is there like how do you go about that?
You just contact me and that's how you go about it, and I'll have a conversation with you.
Oh,
yeah,
lovely.
yeah, that's what it is. Yeah,
Thanks so much.
just to sort of talk through.
Yeah,
You know, yeah,
great. Thank you.
There's a hard line item on the slide which talks about, so I can speak loud.
Oh, we need to be the
Online.
Oh, okay. Right. Hello, World Wide Web. The hard line item on the slide which you were in the ReGen's rationale for engaging in consumer participation said there were strategic reasons, and I listened, but couldn't hear about the strategic considerations, ReGen's strategic considerations in being involved in consumer participation.
Well, I guess it's because of I essentially came on board before the reform of the AOD sector. I contributed to the submission into the department around the whole it's a major change in the organisation, and the whole thing was it was expected in the sector that there will be more talk of, I guess, you know, the more consumer participation activities enforced by government, which probably didn't really happen. But we were preparing for that. Everyone was expecting that it was didn't happen. So that's one of the main ones. But also too, I guess we did quality accreditation was also a critical one to be able to meet that standard, the quality accreditation standard. And I think also too, I know we call this a strategic driver, but I think it actually complements ReGen's values, which is empowerment, collaborative work, partnership, establishing partnerships. Any questions? Okay. So that's the best of Lawrence we say. I should have told you guys.
I think the really issue too that comes up through this is the recognition that the ReGen has had for a long time, is that you cannot provide good services without consumer involvement actually in what doesn't work. You know, we've got too many services in too many places. I think they know what people want and what works, and just put that into place. So, you know, in relation to our, you know, one of our major strategic roles is actually to sort of say, this should actually work for people.
Add to that. I'd like to add to that. I think one of the areas where consumer participation needs to be inserted is at certain forms of environments. That at this stage, people come out of volunteer training programs feeling people without actually having asked a lot of questions of their own practice, because they haven't had to. And if consumer participation was an aspect of those courses, then we may end up with something a little bit different.
I just wanted to support that. I'm the manager of training and education in ReGen, and one of the things that we've really noticed is that the change process, the real change that seems to be happening, you know, it is a cultural change, and I think that it is something that we need to address.
I think they're American.
Regina, you mentioned staff that initiated their own consumer participation programs or events or inclusions. Can you give some examples of those?
Should have those examples in mind. I had there was he's actually at Drew Street who formed, there wasn't a Drew Street is one of our sites, not our sites, that was the site in the West Catchment Information. And she put together a feedback system there because there wasn't any feedback coming in, so I just made that naturally part of the job of what was happening in the region. Another example was Joe, our financial officer. She was doing some advocacy around the, the significant fines that can clock up tens of thousands of dollars. You might be aware of that. And so she put together a group of consumers that I was away at in Indonesia. She got a group of consumers, 4 consumers who had a lot of big clients to come and contribute their experiences to this forum. So things like that. Like I wish I'd had this to be exams close to that. And it was more thanks to thank goodness.
Yeah, the consumer participation working group was actually set up by staff.
Yes,
so that was really long
that's
about consumer participation.
That's right. Yeah, the initial working group that actually and wrote the paper and so on. That exactly it was driven by staff. So there's been a lot of I guess I want this practice and I want a desire for this practice to become part of the organization.
I'd like to know about the ethnic background of participants, consumer. Do you have a cross section?
I'm not sure if that's in the terms of reference. Like, I think that some ethnic backgrounds, probably, yeah. I'm not.
Oh, no, we don't real. We've got Quon, thank goodness.
I think I'm not sure about ethnically as well, but I think that we're looking at, when we're doing the recruitment process, about starting to look at a diverse group of people, like ethnically and in all other ways, genders, and yeah.
We're going to talk about in terms of
I should have identified myself too. I'm Joanne Stanton from the Ethnic Communities Drugs hence my interest.
Yeah, I haven't come across any no discrimination at all. It's just
We did have a long, I'm not sure if it was last week, but we had a long conversation about how to be more inclusive and whether when we're making our recruitment choices, whether to then, like ethically, how does that work and stuff. So it is like on the agenda.
affirmative action.
Affirmative action, yeah. So,
work in progress.
yes.
It is a work in progress.
excellent. All right, thank you very much. Excellent. And I do apologise for not introducing Regina. I didn't realise it was
I'm glad I got away with it.
a joint. But I have to say, I absolutely love the nothing about us without us aspect of consumer participation. If you've been looking at the news lately, you've probably noticed that it's been used by refugee advocates. Obviously, they're horrible conditions, and they're not getting a say in it. We need to make sure that the people who are using the services are getting what they need. Otherwise, there's no point really using the services. I'm a bit aware of the time because we're running a bit behind. Our next presentation is from Julie Anderson, who's the Consumer Participation Manager at Neami. She'll be talking about the innovation in consumer participation at Neami. So her role is to support the organisation to implement credit production as a process to strengthen consumer participation across the entire organisation. In 2015, Julie completed the National Mental Health Commission's Future Leaders in Mental Health program and is a member of MHA National Register of Consumer Advocates. She's provided advice to federal and state governments from a lived experience perspective, which is obviously she's completed the Australian Company Directors course and currently sits on the board of directors for Forensic Care in Victoria. So please welcome Julie.
Thank you. It's great to be here and to hear so many beautiful presentations. I was saying earlier when I arrived, it's hard to do this job from behind a desk. Things are desk work, but you need to be out hearing different perspectives that contribute to supporting people to have their voice. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and the Wurundjeri people for calling action, and acknowledge people from other lands that might be here today. Neami is a community managed organisation. I'm not sure if everybody is aware. It started here in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, where you had large institutions like Brindle, psychiatric hospitals, built up from a deinstitutionalised base. It currently provides services across 5 states of Australia, and last year 7,000 people with mental illness accessed Neami services around individual support, recovery, homelessness services, housing and support, supporting people in subacute services, what we call step up, step down. So people who want to avoid hospitalisation and people coming out of hospital on their way to home. So it's a big project to involve support consumers to have their voice in the organisation. So Neami was always involved consumers in the organisation, but in 2010 the board instigated an audit of what participation activities there were in Neami. It led to the Consumer Participation and Leadership Report. Some of the recommendations of that report is Neami had consumer advisory groups that came out of that small service, but as the service grew, the organisation and consumers said we do particularly suit involvement of a small group of people had opportunities to participate as a consumer advisory group in each state, but broader participation and people's needs to be engaged in participation activities weren't being met. So what was the approach to think about, one of the recommendations of the reports were also that that we needed better systems and processes around participation. So how are we going to do that and involve a large number of people? We looked at the literature around co-production to move away from sort of tokenistic and thought that approach in terms of supporting people to participate and have their voice heard in the service. Now, co-production, there's many meanings of co-production, but I've heard a really simple meaning lately, and it's a bit left field, but it's like people say to me, what's the difference between co-design, co-production, what do these terms mean? And the explanation I've heard is out of this area, but say you've got a riverbank on one side and a riverbank on another. A service says, we want to build a bridge, come and help us. Be a term around co-design. Co-production would be thinking about, we've got a riverbank on this side, we've got a riverbank on the other side. We want to get from one side to the other. Come and tell us how to do it. So consumers may come up with a flying fox, a raft, and they may come up with a basic explanation about thinking about these terms. So one of the first things we did was to think about developing a consumer participation framework, and this is my colleague Prof Carla, who was involved in co-designing the consumer participation project, which set out the strategies around what consumers identified they'd like to see participation at Neami. There's just a few slides around that. And then we developed the consumer participation framework. So part of the consumer participation framework, part of the literature, what the literature said to us is how do people find their voice and what sphere of influence they have. We thought about the spheres of influence in terms of individual, what influence people have around their own individual health needs, what influence they have around the service that they're accessing, around the whole organisation, around the mental health systems in the area of systems advocacy, and in the community. So how could we support people having a say or having their voice heard in those areas of influence? But also, as I said, 7,000 people access Neami services. So that's a huge thing to think about. But what does it mean locally? What does it mean locally in, say, Yarraville to Liverpool and Sydney? You know, people aren't going to have the same needs. They're not going to participation, but they could be common areas. So at the moment, we're currently supporting staff capacity today to think about how do consumers and staff work together to develop a plan for their local area so consumers can find their voice and have an influence in their local area, as well as the organisation and the community. I don't know, and I'm putting this out say in Craigieburn, people may have problem with first responders, police or ambulance come when they're unwell. So how could staff and consumers work together in the community to go and participate and have an influence of changing that system? Some examples of areas of co-design that had in the organisation is when we developed the health prompt. Consumers said to me that physical health was a big issue for them. So these are the things, some of the organisational co-design projects we've taken up. The other area is our model of care around the collaborative recovery model. We've recently involved consumers as co-researchers and thinking about and talking to consumers around the fidelity of that model and how it works for them. So that's a practice Neami undertakes. There's been challenges to the project and great successes. Some of the challenges I think coming up is around building the staff capacity and a culture change around it seeing as not the core work that people do. So that's been one of the challenges. One of the successes I'll talk about later in terms of the training we've put in place. So part of the structure we was employing what's called participation officer in employment, and then for them to engage in site champions, so staff members that are going to champion the project at their site, and then also engaging consumer champions to work in a co-design co-production way with the staff in educating the staff at the service and consumers of the service. And then the area we talked about, that's one of the priority areas of the framework in terms of developing a planning framework. We developed the site champions, as
discussed, and we developed what's called Launching Pad, which is an education and training business. And part of the Launching Pad program is around consumers understanding their rights from a human rights basis, how to look at policy, what supports they need to be on interview panels. But we're great opportunity. We've had great outcomes as a challenge. As I said earlier, the amount of consumers that access Neami, when you run a group, a training group, you can only have 10 or 12 people in the group. So we need to look at modes of delivery and how that access can be opened up to a broader range of people. So that's people that have access to that program really benefit. I've got really angry about it. When consumers have learnt about their rights under human rights framework, they get angry about why didn't I know when I was put on a CTO or I was made voluntary in hospitals. So it causes some trauma to people about why didn't anybody explain my rights earlier. So I have to work with that. Developing the consumer participation. As I said, the Smart Champion portfolio holder, the state consumer participation officers work around their training, and consumers can access Launching Pad. It's really important for staff to get together and clarify their perceptions, that they have a forum to say, I'm not comfortable with this, I don't think this is going to work, you know, and express that openly, and for consumers to say the same, clarifying their perception around what participation means to them, for consumers and staff to come together to share their perceptions and start to developing what could be done in that sphere of influence in their local area. So it's for Neami, we have projects to co-design on an organisational basis, but also it's important of what's happening with people in their local area. And the structure, some of the structures that in the organisation are around interview panels, clinical governance, co-designing clinical governance structure, in our quality committees. We have a person-centred practice committee, resource for performance committee, culture and safety committee. We have a lot of committees, peer worker framework working group, where we're working out what is the essence of peer work. Neami employ 45 peer workers. Communications working group, research committee, co-facilitation of groups. The research committee is really interesting, where consumers co-design the research agenda. So what are the research topics we're going to take up for the organisation from a consumer voice? One of the ones that's being considered at the moment from consumers is the medication on their bodies, on their physical health. So it might be something we'll be taking up the research committee to discuss that. Other key priority areas around building capacity of the consumers and the workforce. And then there's just an example of some of the course content of Launching Pad. Launching Pad is really great for consumers to get together. It has an outer, you know, what we thought was the core of Launching Pad is also outer scope sort of benefits of people networking, people creating a sort of peer information for each other, people supporting each other in their recovery journey. Oh, what did I do? So that's module 2. And then just the other key priority areas. And just some figures around consumer participation. Neami pays Also has a payment policy for people at $40 an hour for their participation, and there's around that. Defining participation, whether someone who identifies in their recovery journey that they'd like to, they've got skills in doing yoga, identify they'd like to run a yoga group and co-facilitate a yoga group. So whether that's paid participation for them to co-facilitate a yoga group, or all these questions come up in organisations, and you really need to find a way to tease them out and be very clear around what that's about. That's the presentation. So I'm open to questions, but I spoke to Carla in the break around some of her research, and what her research has identified is that we're seeing coming up at Neami around, as I said, start thinking it's not their job, this is going to take more resources. What if consumers ask more of us than what we can do? So these things are we're trying to approach in a dialogue and working through as an organisation.
Do you have any questions, please?
I was confused as well the way through your presentation.
Oh, were you? Sorry.
I didn't understand. I don't know what Neami means. I mean, drug alcohol is for acronyms, and I'm sure mental health is so on.
Neami is the name of the organisation. It's a community managed organisation.
I understand it, but what was the acronym mean?
Many years ago, about 30 years ago, it was the North East Alliance for the Mentally Ill that was based in the northern area of Melbourne. But that name is not the name of the organisation anymore. People still identified with the word Neami, so we just call the organisation Neami. It doesn't stand for anything other than the name.
Yeah, how do you access Launching Pad?
Yeah. Launching Pad is we offer it in say different areas at Box Hill or Melbourne or Newcastle, and people identify they like to do the course, and so they're supported to do the course. So it's when the course is full, we let people know when it's full, and then when it might be coming back to their area. But as I said, we need to develop a better way and access it through maybe online, a more local delivery. So there's some of the things we're considering at the moment.
Do people actually have to be users of Neami?
At the moment, they do. There are people that access the service, but we're open to dialogue with our Learning and Development Unit. It's run by our Learning and Development Unit. If other services want to look at a Launching Pad to be rolled out of the service. Regina.
Can you just talk about the visual decisions, like the visual decision and your consumer participation at Neami, and what are the other skills you consumer participation officers or talk about a little bit?
In the other positions in the organisation in each state is around building the capacity of the organisation in that state. So we've got high-level strategy and components around the framework and strategy. The consumer participation officers in each state work with the state manager, the line manager, but they get from me around implementing the strategy in their state. So they would work with the site managers as well, participation portfolio holders at each site that are the carriers of the culture to get it established throughout a large organisation. I think on reflection, if I had my time again in implementing a project, I would have done it in one area, from that area, and taken it out order, rather than approach a whole organisational change at once. There's two thoughts around that. One is there's a change, implement it, do it quickly, move on. The others is that sort of mushrooming effect.
Thank you very much. It's fantastic to have Neami here. I do know quite a few people who use it and very happy with it. Access to mental health professionals is vital for any type of AOD problems. So we are running a little bit late, but that's okay. One last presentation before we do the panel. We have Brent Allan, who's the CEO of Living Positive Victoria. The presentation is Making My Voice Count, Activating Innovation for Leadership. Brent's been working in the community response to HIV for over 25 years, both in Australia and internationally. He has qualifications in health education, business, community services, community services management, as well as public and social health experience at all levels of government, local, state, federal, and international with the UNDP. His passion for community and consumer representation in health service policy, programming, and evaluation. Provides an advisory role for both the national and state governments in Australia on blood sexually transmitted infections, as well as LGBTQI health and wellbeing. He's also representative to the International AIDS Society Industry Liaison Forum. So please welcome
Hey everyone. I love this topic, and I guess I want to start just about why this topic is so important and read to you from 3 different documents, 2 of which will have absolute application to your work. The first comes from the SHARC Service Report, written in 2013. This is a report that advocates for why services need to reform, community services in Australia, mostly in Victoria. It says the design, delivery, evaluation, and commissioning of publicly funded services should seek to demonstrable improvements in productivity and ensure community well-being is enhanced in the most cost-effective. And that is in a subsection specifically on consumer participation. The second quote comes from the most recent Australian Competition Policy Review. And it says governments need to allow room for providers to innovate in response to changing user demands and benchmark the performance of providers, credibly threatening to replace those who do not meet the needs of users. And finally, and this one may have had in mind, while core functions of many of the community-based responses to HIV remain essential, community systems are being challenged to adapt to changing service models and demands, not just from funders, but from community. So I think the imperative to ensure that you are basing your work on the voices of consumers has to be at the forefront of what you do. In my organization, we just published a consumer or a community stakeholder strategy, which has been really great. It's been a bit humbling. It did tell us what we were doing shockingly wrong, but in many ways, that's exactly what you need to hear, and that's exactly what you need to know. In this presentation, in particular, what I want to talk about is how we go from entrepreneurship that we need to see, in fact, to adjust social change and to influence social change. The qualities involved, creativity, absolutely. If you can find someone in your organization, consumer, who you can say, wow, they're a really creative person, those are the people to involve. Have a vision. And of course, you can't just have everyone who has a vision, otherwise you're not going to get anything done. But you definitely need people who have a vision for change. You need people who are prepared to take risks, and most importantly, you need people who can embrace their mistakes. Because most risks you take, you can't assume it's all going to be successful. And if you're going to encourage people to take risks, you've got to encourage them to fail. And fail without repercussion. So I think I've always said the worst things we do is when we fail and then fail to promote our failures. Just destined everyone else to fail. What I want to talk about specifically, and I'll try to zip through this as quick as I can because I know we're running out of time, is just about how we can build resilience in our consumer base for social change. How we can create strategic opportunities. And many of the presenters have talked about partnerships, how important they are. I'm gonna invite you to go a little bit deeper and start considering how not all partnerships are the same. And finally, I just want to give you a little bit of an example of each sector, social health, public health, and social change come together in how we're doing our work. Your slide that you said is your favorite slide on nothing about us without us is absolutely pivotal in the response to HIV. And in fact, in this response to HIV, it's gone one step further. There is actually a national policy that is now an international policy that governs the work in HIV around the world called the GPAC. And what it means is the greater involvement of people living with and affected by HIV. It's now morphed even further because at some point we realized not enough. You can sit somebody on your consumer group and they're just a bloody token. About now what's called the MIPA-GPA principle. So this is the greater involvement and meaningful participation of people living with HIV. Getting more people involved, but giving them real roles. Improving their capacity, empowering them to make change, giving them the skills and the enablement to make change. So in terms of building resilience, I'm going to show you this little bit of a theory thing. There's two ideas. What goes in terms of, let's say like down here, this is where someone gets diagnosed with HIV. That's where someone decides they have a problem or there is a problem with their recreational drug use or something like that. They enter our services. And what they end up doing is they go through counseling, possibly some peer support, maybe some buddy program. What this is doing is it's moving the individual up both axes simultaneously. So they're starting at a solo response, one-on-one with people. They're moving from coping with the challenge they're faced into some confidence about being able to face that challenge more effectively. Going the wrong way. As you move up, certainly the one axis towards group-based work, you start seeing newly diagnosed programs or the new entry programs. You start seeing healthy living programs, how to change your behaviors, inculcating skills. Supportive programs where you're getting people together, not in therapeutic, yes, but I'm talking non-therapeutic work. This is about bringing people together to support each other, not one-on-one, but in a group-based way. As we go further down these axes, you kind of have to think of the person, probably you for your thing, but that they're kind of going like that. So they're moving from a solo coping position, group work, through to confidence, enabling. And what you have over here is stuff around mentoring and coaching. In the HIV sector, what we have is people enabled enough, confident enough, that they're out speaking to others, that they're using their skills, not just in the sector, but in the broader sense of their lives. So they're moving those basic skills they have into their whole lives. And finally, we have the leaders that we're looking for. In the HIV sector, there's been a lot of talk, and certainly for those who know it, at the advent of antiretroviral therapies, that changed the world for people living with HIV like myself. Before we were just trying to cope, actually be the leaders to make change. But we have to build those leaders, and that's where consumer involvement comes into play. I said I was going to talk a little bit about partnerships, and I will. In your handouts, you have a blue table. It says partnership strategies for working well together, because it has a really small font. So I'm glad, thank you for printing those off for everyone. What it is the partnership response to HIV in Australia has been bloody amazing. Really, it has been outstanding, hallmark in terms of internationally, in terms of best practice. But I have, for the longest time, always been concerned that not every partnership's the same partnership. You know, I can have a partnership with you about how we do our work, you as well, but you know, the nature of our partnership is different. And so what we've been using in my organization, and it's been spreading out, which is great, is this notion of redefining the partnership, being clear about what kind of partners we have in different ways and different approaches. So in the first column, a networking partner, partnership. This is about bringing people together, sort of common interests, we're working together, but you know, we probably share information, we kind of partner that way, but it's not much more than that. And that's not a bad partnership, but it's just a form of partnership. You move to the next column where it's a coordinating partnership. There you're deeper into what you're sharing. So this is the content. You're probably starting to assign, from an organization point of view, people to work together. Partnership, right? It's a little bit more formal. There's generally arrangements that repeat themselves. If you go to the third one, the cooperating partnership, this is where you start negotiating together on how you do the partnership. Here you probably have plans, like joint plans, right? And finally, at the higher end, which is what we call collaborating partnerships, this is where you're sharing turf. This is where you're sharing ego. This is where you're sharing your resources, sharing your people ubiquitously back and forth to get things done. And this is, again, a different type of partnership. And what I want to really stress to you in using this table, and by all means use it, it's not Living Positive Victoria's table, it's referenced from a research called Hillerman, who did some great work on partnerships. And one's not better than another, they're just different. And I kind of want to show you how it gets applied, specifically in a program that's called the Positive Leadership Development Institute. This is a program that's run by people to build leadership capacity. It's a national program. It has no single agency running it. There are 9 collaborating partners, us in that column, who run the program. There are another 11 cooperating partners who give funding to the program, but don't decide how the program runs. In the coordinating level, there's probably 3 or 4 agencies that can't afford to give money and can't sponsor delegates, for example, to go to the program, but they're actively involved in recruiting people, promoting the program, all of that sort of thing. And finally, at the networking level, this is where lots of individuals play a role. This is where all of the alumni play a role. We consider all of the alumni of the Institute a networking partner. They spread the word, they get the word out there, they're talking to their friends, they're reposting it on Facebook after they get the post. You know, they're networking it. All work together, they're all influential. The important thing to understand is everyone has something to offer. What's important is find out what can they offer. And then give them the credibility they know of what they can offer. This is a sense of how the collaborating partnership looks. So those are the 9, I was right. 9 collaborating partners. We have an application in front of us at the moment, partner, to join that. In the cooperating partners, look, here we have Carla's Research Institute. They all help in multiple ways. In fact, helps us do the participant evaluations. So their contribution is very much in kind, and they help us do the design and the analysis. You know, evaluations from the actual workshops. The rest of them do lots of different things. Melbourne Community Voice promotes it. Joy does regular spots from graduates to talk about the program. And down here we have some other agencies who just really joined us as coordinating networking partners. Open Ground, for example, offers free mindfulness training to the graduates so they can continue their leadership journey. And this is kind of how it gets written up. So networking partners in this other project, it's called the Disclosure Project, which encourages disclosure online. What networking partners would do, what coordinating partners would do, and what cooperating partners will do. What's really important is that in this project, unlike the PLDI project, they've already decided, or we decided, who the two collaborating partners are in the other domains, and seeing what they can offer to the program. And this includes individuals, not just agencies. I want to end with what I think is a really good example of how to take theory into practice about being effective. And this is called combination HIV prevention. And I'm not really going to focus on the stuff in the middle, because that's really about like happening, and there are different things you can do. What I focus on is the two sides. What this theory says is you can do all these things to have highly effective prevention, biomedical strategies, condoms, you can change human rights and social justice. Have the pressure exerted on either side, not just one side, both sides, of community involvement and engagement, and leadership and scaling up of the affected communities. This isn't going to work, no matter how much. And what's been fantastic about this theory, being used around the world, in the sense of how everything interlinks, is this increasing acknowledgement that without the pressure from community on either side, skilling them up, getting them involved, change isn't going to happen. Thanks.
Any questions, please? Not yet?
I'm sorry. Well, that was an amazing presentation. It was really inspiring for me. It was what you were saying was just really switched on, and I want to thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge.
That was fantastic. The documents that you talked about, I was really interested. Where would they be available?
We'll get them on the website.
They'll be on the ReGen website. The one.
Oh, the community engagement strategy.
The positive leadership.
Development Institute. Yeah, just go to www.PLDI Australia. You'll find it. Google PLDI. You'll find it. Oh, there is a Canadian program, so make sure you choose the Australian.
You want out? Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
That was absolutely wonderful. Very timely with the introduction of the new HIV medications coming into Australia as well. And yeah, also the need to change the social perception of HIV. So much stigma about it, same as mental health and AOD issues. So yeah, it's really great to hear from you. I have the panel. But before I do, anything you missed will be available. We've got some links on Twitter, and you can also go to the ReGen website. You'll be able to find everything. And I also need to give a shout out to Respect, which is the newsletter for consumer participants. So if you want to go, it's on the website, or you can sign in on the table down there so that you can receive regular updates for that. So we're just going to be setting up the panel right now. So if you would mind staying seated for a couple of minutes, and yeah, we'll be back with you.
Yeah.
Marg, I didn't ask the question since we were and I've already asked it. You mentioned that there was a problem.
Right, everyone's take their seats, please.
Did you
Before we start the panel, in your packs we have an evaluation form, which we would really appreciate if you could fill out for us, and just put it in the Regina on the side. Oh, sorry, on the side of your desk. Yeah, if you fill it out for us, that would be fabulous. So for the panel today, we have people that have already been introduced. So I'll be on it myself instead of Richard, who wasn't able to make it today. Bella, Marg, Julie, Brent. So we have Quon, who is a peer leader who facilitates the ReGen peer support group. He's been undertaking consumer participation at ReGen for over 2 years now. At the Vada Call Forum on his experience of being Greek, Macedonian and using AOD services was very well received. As part of the evaluation of the pilot of the talk program, which is a day rehab that's run here along with the Catalyst program, but it's for people who have contact with the criminal justice system. He's also assisted and advocated for participants as they complete intricate surveys. He's presented at the Talk and Catalyst programs on his experience of using the Catalyst program, completing his advanced diploma in community services. So, thank you. So the panel, yes, everyone wants to come up, that would be lovely. The panel will be moderated by who is ReGen's Program Director. Looking forward to a lively discussion about current practice, current challenges, and ways forward for AOD services in Victoria. Thanks very much.
And the entertainment one, my understanding of
Thanks very much, Tori. Look, I think we're running a little behind, but there's actually quite a bit of time left. The good thing, I think, is there have been opportunities along the way for people to ask questions, but this is definitely the over to you part of the program. There'll be questions from the floor, but there's also other questions that have either come to me magically, or they will via Paul also magically, and he will stick his hand up and ask those questions. So this is one of those opportunities that's fantastic for me to look, sound, and act like Tony Jones. So I'm going to do that. Well, I can pull off. But the thing that I will say is that if your questions are short, then more people will get an opportunity to ask them. And your comments, as Tony would say, I'll take it as a comment that needs to be, they need to be even shorter than your question. So look, I'll throw open to you in the first instance, and remembering that the mics are important. It's not about your voice, it's about having your questions recorded for our YouTube channel. So over to you.
With the cutbacks, federal and state, to do with funding, this costs money to implement. What measures are being made to redress this?
In the mental health service, the National Mental Health Commission put out a report which the federal government responded to, and part of their response was to implement consumer care participation. So hopefully, because of that, that's in the federal government response, it will get some traction.
Yeah, I'll just say something about that. It's everybody's looking at the cost cutting or that. I think the whole sector should be looking at what the cost will be if this is not implemented and taken off fully. More expensive option if it doesn't get taken.
Thank you. Any other comments from panel members about funding issues? Okay, other questions?
I have a question following on from that. One of the things do you think that organisations can do to really embed practice within their organisation? So let's say for things like Regina's position, what do you think is the single most important thing to do to actually embed it so that it will become an ongoing practice in the organisation?
Well, I've got, I suppose, a bit of a comment on that one. I think that there needs to be a lot more interaction between all the different services that are available. As I mentioned before, it's really difficult to have to tell your story more than once, especially if it involves sexual abuse or other types of trauma. I found that I would have told my story at least 10 times to 10 different people, and basically re-traumatized me every time, which is, it's disgraceful to me. So I think the consent is obviously a really, really important issue, but it can maybe also be kind of a basis of like a group network where everyone can come together, and because it can be maybe run by consumers, or at least consumers are involved in it. Yeah, you'll be able to put everything all together and not have to go over everything all again. And like Neami and other mental health services, they've probably been told the story, and they can pass the story on to other organisations instead of making the person re-traumatize themselves. So.
Hi. And I can't answer that. So many things have come up for me today, and I would say is that to make sure that an organisation continues to champion participation. It has to be in every element of the organisational system, including the mission and the vision statement, all the way through to job descriptions. Certainly one of the things that I think has been raised a couple of times, particularly in your material, Carla, was the requirement for people to be made responsible within an organisation for carrying this through, and I think here we have Regina, and to make sure that those kind of tasks are not just added on and unfunded, to make sure that they are part of a person's job description and to make sure that it turns up in the line items. I think that someone was talking about, you might have mentioned it earlier, Tori. I guess one of the things that's occurred to me today, and certainly perhaps as a result of your presentation today, is consumer participation as a whole social movement. It's not just something that organisations can really do on their own. The best way to really keep consumer participation occurring is to have all organisations within the sector saying the same thing at the same time. There's no room for conservatism, there's more worries about intellectual property. But this is really something that requires networking, and it isn't just something that helps an organisation. This is a civil right, this is part of democracy, this is the way things should work. So I've been really impressed by a lot of the things that we've talked about today, and I really think some of that larger stuff, without the consumer advocacy out there, beyond the sector, that funding isn't going to happen. You know, it's one thing for a sector to be screaming for money, which we all are, but if the consumers out there aren't on board demanding it from their parliamentarians, that this kind of funding isn't going to occur. So I'm just saying that this is a huge thing, a huge network that is really part of social change, not just the sector system delivery.
So I'll just say again, I'm not a service provider, so you can take my comments with a grain of salt, but I am part of a very large organisation that has to look after itself and report on things. And what's important to their reporting becomes important to every staff member. Or chestnuts of accreditation or insurance or OHS and child protection, those kind of things that an organisation has to do to protect itself, is a really interesting lever to think about how consumer participation can be part of those things. And that opens up the possibility for that to be a very tokenistic ticker box thing on an accreditation form or process. But when you embed it with the things we were just talking about, and it's owned from the bottom up and the top down, to make it not tokenistic but genuine and real.
And write this down. ROI, return on investment. If you don't know the basic language of economics, learn the basic language of economics. You need to be able to articulate clearly and coherently why your service, your program, return on investment. In the HIV sector, we're really lucky. We've been able to demonstrate return on investment of principles. It's a hell of a lot cheaper to get people who are living with HIV to talk their story again and again, and I know what that's like, reliving it again and again, than it is to pay a counselor to do it, a social worker to do it. And I love them to death. But there is significant returns on investment when you engage consumers in the work. You also build their capacity, you empower them. So there's the social benefit as well. And those who are way smarter than me can actually put a dollar figure on social investment. And we're so small, all of us, the mental health sector, the sexual trauma sector, work together with your allies. If you can't afford to get one of those highfalutin economists to come in and do the work for you, partner up with your partner agencies. Work together to define your return on investment.
Sorry, switch to short. I have no idea about economics, which is why I'm always broke. I do know that
in terms of the human value of consumer partnerships. So the data we collected through the phone lines at Family Drug Health was that particularly of people who are using drugs deteriorated rapidly through social isolation, the stigma, stereotyping, all of those things. To initially participate in a support group and then become a consumer participant. It is hard to say. You know, your self-worth returns, your self-belief returns, your mental health improves, you're able to lend a hand to someone else, whether they're next to them or teaching them or doing something. So I don't know how we measure that in terms of economics, but I think in terms of us as humans, it's invaluable. And I'm sure it's the same whether it's in MI or here, you know, participation just differs to people's lives.
And I'll speak as a consumer. It actually gives you a sense of purpose and dignity. And I consider my whole life has been a vast, expensive education. Sitting here and I from that people with people who've got to go through this. And from my perspective, it can't be further from the truth. And that's why I've stepped into the consumer participation role, because in the end of the day, I'm actually proud and honoured to be with up to be able to tell people my journey. And what I'm saying, you really cannot put a price on that. And sometimes I think you should be able to put a price on that, because that is such a valuable investment. You can't put a price on. Thank you. Thanks.
I think one thing to do to find our voice, as we've heard here, I think organisations can do so much. And certainly organisations place ways that people can complain, to participate, to, you know, have a quality service, but it is broader than this. In America, I feel that they're more political, around participation and engagement. And I've noticed in Australia we tend to partner more, and I reflect on that and think, what are the ways politically that people can find their voice and have a say in things.
I just wanted to reflect a little bit on stigma, and you know, there's lots of different ways that people participate. I've been to my children's PNC meeting as a participant and brought out my brain, but you know, I had no stigma in attending that. I was welcomed and I was recognised and valued. Significant health problem, attending the hospital and advocating for him or for other children in that. But I'm not a mother who's going to be surveilled for the proper care of her child because of the things I may have done in other aspects of my life. And I think the literature abounds in alcohol and other drug research and in mental health of the stigma and shame that people carry with them. And that is an enormous barrier for lots of things, including consumer participation, and we should recognise that. So the kind of gains that may give someone in parallel than the gains I got going to a boring PNC meeting on a Monday night, so that I'm not a stigmatised individual in that space. Talking about what it gives back to you is a wholly interesting economic analysis, as well as absolutely important individual aspect of your life. So the stigma just cannot be discounted in this space.
I can't agree more with you, Carla. I think having worked in such a highly stigmatized field as HIV, and I want to acknowledge as well, you know, that I'm someone who's lived with hepatitis C. I currently identify as an injection drug user. I'm living with HIV. I live successfully with mental health and issues, depression and anxiety, and all those are highly stigmatized. And you know, I've learned over the years that, you know, the thing that makes you different, the things that makes you bounce back, gives you that shock absorbers you need is resilience. And resilience is something that builds. It's not an innate quality, you know, and it comes and goes, it waxes and wanes over time. But, you know, our investment in building resilience is still something I would like to see quantified. Resilience, when we sit there and we help someone through their problem so that they become more resilient. Yeah, I mean, what is the value? You know, what is the value of that? And I think that's where we have to get smarter, because we know there's value. You know, maybe we can't put a dollar figure on it, but we know the value. And I think that's where we have to start being advocates in strategic ways about challenging stigma. I mean, especially in the mental health field, especially in the AOD fields, you know, highly, highly stigmatized areas.
I'd like to say something about stigma. It's that soft stigma that really concerns me, and it was stuff that I think a couple of people have talked about, but particularly Officer Carla, which was the attitude of staff. And these aren't people that would believe that they carry that stigma. You know, I've been working in drug and alcohol for a long time, and most of my colleagues I would describe as very, very decent, kind and generous human beings. But every so often you just kind of strike it. So I'll try not to. But just even the notion that that because, you know, a drug and alcohol condition may in fact be relapsing, there is that concern that we can't connect with people today in a consumer capacity who tomorrow might be unwell. And yet my experience has been that when we actually challenge that kind of stigma, people do see it. They carry it, they don't know they carry it. But when it's challenged, and that's why I was so sure of staff training, so interested in the stuff about including things like this in the drug and alcohol, you know, treatment training. So interested, because if we don't name it and we don't manage it, then it's going to continue to create barriers for consumer participation.
Can I just add to that? As you come tomorrow, but he tells me that's so. And that stigma and what we do carry inside, because as an educator, there are moments when I have real self-doubt whether I have the right to be teaching this or to be educating people when in society's view I fail as a parent. So, and I have to push myself past that and say, well, and me walking beside you, I might not be. Does it make sense?
Yeah, adding on that, that was obviously a really good question. For International Women's Day, I actually did a presentation here, and I spoke to my mum, who used to work with Trevor and Donna at Pleasant View about 30 years ago. And and so I actually asked her about the stigma that she saw then compared to how I perceived it now. And the difference was remarkable. It wasn't really extroverted, so it wasn't obviously, you know, women are worse than men or anything like that. It was really subtle, but there was this is all the staff at a rehab facility who just had this kind of internal stigma of you know, scum, basically, especially against women, which is terrible. But it's really good to see the difference now. Like I haven't experienced any discrimination whatsoever in ReGen. Maybe I'm just lucky, or maybe because this is the only place I've used, maybe in my view, the stigma it's getting there. It's a lot less than it was. And I think with as we go further with mental health issues, and especially celebrities and everything, we're coming out saying they've got depression and anxiety, which is so common, that there shouldn't be a stigma about it anymore. And we're getting there. It's very slow, but we're getting there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can speak from personal experience. So I've been the president in the early 80s. and my experience from that possibly kept me out of rehabilitation for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Because, as you were saying, it was overbearing. You're almost embarrassed that you were there. And then, unfortunately or fortunately, depends how you look at it. Another go, so I ended up going into the current place. And when people say chalk and cheese, I mean, they really mean to put some chalk and cheese, and straight away it's shown how the sector has come. But after sitting here today, you just realise how much further it has to go. And it's not as if it is. People are putting the effort to doing the work. We will try. So, thank you.
Can anybody just reflect for a moment and give us service providers a little bit more of your experience about becoming a consumer? Because I've heard some really positive things and starting now to talk about issues, but what were your experiences, things that we can learn from in terms of, we could have done this a little bit better?
That's a good question, because from my perspective, when I'm talking about ReGen, that's the only organisation I've had experience with, and from what I think, ReGen is possibly leading the way in consumer participation. So, except that, there's still a long way to go. Like, as for my involvements, I would usually be good with the idea of consumer consultants, because obviously we're just tokenistic is a word I heard previously, and that was my preconception. But after being with the set organisation, that's tokenistic is not a word I would use, because we have now got our own office in the building, and in a way that signifies that the organisation is serious. And by just even having a showcase annual focus on issue of participation actually shows how it's starting to be deeply ingrained in the way regions are actually approaching participation. I feel privileged because I feel like in a position that's really going to bring significant changes in the way consumers are viewed, and not the real privilege that I'm actually involved in it. And that's a big problem.
I suppose the process with them regarding the SHARC, I'm sorry, we just sort of fell into it because it is a volunteer role and it's a peer support program. So I'm perhaps not seeing the same, combined maybe barriers of organisation there. I think that one of the barriers for other consumers to participate is that they don't believe they've got the skills or the abilities, or they're going to stuff something up or something. But, through being invited to training days or information community education days, you can break down those barriers so that they can see that, yes, it might be that I'm organising morning too, but there's still participation, until you can lead them and help them move into other areas of participation. So we have to start somewhere with everybody.
Yeah, I think the main reason I did it was because I didn't feel I was any less than the staff here. I think a huge difference. There was also a bit of an incident that happened in the first time I did Catalyst, and I expressed my opinion, and something was done about it straight away, which was amazing. I wasn't expecting anything like that. And doing the Catalyst program completely changed my life. I learned how to stop having panic attacks, which were, like, I was going to hospital quite often because, you know, I thought I was dying. I wanted to give back, and I wanted to help people the same way that ReGen helped me. And because I know it's a really good organisation, especially when I was doing the surveys in the waiting room, being able to, I'm basically Spruker for Catalyst. All the mental health providers that I see, I'm a Spruker for Catalyst. You have no idea. I tell everybody about it. I love it, absolutely love it. And it's also really, really nice to know that welcoming back in my safe place. This is a really, really safe area for me. Even though I live on the opposite side of the city, happy to drive up here. I'm safe. And yeah, it's good. So thank you, Regina. I love it.
Sorry, I think, Julie, you're about to speak, but can I just preface your remarks by saying an organisation the size of Neami and like you would have experienced all sorts of issues in your journey. So I'm really keen to hear from you.
My journey, I started in this role was probably from having my rights taken away in a clinical service and thinking how many other people that happens to. And actually reading, being quite bad and reading the Mental Health Act, which they didn't invite to do, and finding that they didn't follow the Act. So thinking about how many people that happens to, and then just accessing the service, having good supports, and thinking about taking up opportunities when they came to me, opportunities where staff, for whatever reason, couldn't take up, didn't have the flexibility to go to this meeting, to go to that meeting, and not being employed, doing that, and also learning but never forgetting from that lived experience perspective that it was something else that nobody from a lived experience can sort of see. You know, we all have professional capacities, knowledge, but sometimes from an expertise point of view, you forget the subjective experience of people and never forgetting experience, bringing that to the table.
I wanted to reflect on who we've got speaking, which is the success stories in successful organisations that help support people to become consumer advocates and effectively operate like that. I mean, it was about a treatment journey, going to one rehab and then turning you off for 20 years. But for consumer participation, there are those risks as well. You know, if the organisation can't support someone and puts them in a very vulnerable, dangerous position for them, they're not just going to turn them off being a consumer rep for 20 years, but it might really damage their process that they're going through. So it's not to be entered into the structural support and ReGen have put behind this program is absolutely important. It's just not a, you know, I'll just wing it and see what happens, because you've got real vulnerable people at the end of the sharp chains.
Thanks so much. Can I just jump in and say, we've got about another 5 minutes. So this is the moment when you're sitting down thinking, gee, if I walk away and don't ask that question, I feel really bad about myself. So you've got an opportunity now to put a question to us. A couple of questions. Okay. Quon,
Totally enjoyed your presentation today. I think it's great. Very passionate about that. What Neami is doing, and also ReGen. I was really interested in around HIV now. I know that HIV is a problem in our community, the average community. I know that we do a lot of around in regards to prevention of HIV. I'm not too sure if we have anything in regards to HIV, which I think is really needed. And I do know it's on the rise. And I just thought maybe if you had any relationship with the Aboriginal community around working across this issue.
Yeah, totally. I lament deeply what's happening in my home country, Canada, with the First Nations population, where the problem with HIV is so profound and so deep and so widespread. It is shocking and it's scary to see almost an entire culture being decimated. Australia, I think there is a massive problem with HIV in the Aboriginal community. The problem is that it is totally hidden. It is hidden because of shame, it's hidden because of stigma, and we don't know the depth of the problem. And people are terrified to come forward and acknowledge that there is HIV positive. I mean, for example, in the leadership program, we've put through probably half dozen, up to about 120 graduates from half dozen Torres Strait Island backgrounds, as well as Maori and Pacific Island backgrounds. And it's, in my mind, the surface of a very deep-veined problem that is multi-pronged. It's about HIV, but it's about mental health, it's about subjectification, it's about gender, it's about a lot of different things. And I think, you know, we need to right the wrongs of a long history.
My name is Diane Ioannou. I'm the national carer of the multicultural mental health. My experience is really high. I really helped the community with stigma. Not only that, I'm helping because I did training about SHARC, about consumer leadership. I got so many trainings. Now, one thing we really achieved lately is through the government, a group of multicultural people with skills, knowledge, and we have really to combine the alcohol support and the mental health issues through a better recovery, because doesn't exist recovery anymore. So, and I'm going to really send an invitation to Helen Kapelos to be with us, and it will be really this Friday, Running Day, and the 15th of June, a big meeting. So don't worry, I'm going to speak with the multicultural fundings for you people. By the way, my nickname is Pocket Rocket. Probably truly, I was really today's talking.
I do know. We were initiated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
We'll take that as a comment, but fantastic comment, and thank you very much for that. Look, one more question if there's one in the room, otherwise we will right up the back. Two if we're really quick.
Hi, I also have just a comment. My name is Ed Hensley, and I'm also not opposed to APSU, and I just wanted to make a comment in regards to economic perspective on consumer participation. And so that is definitely one of positive contributions of consumer participation, that it does improve economic outcomes or outcomes in general. We need to be careful about not stressing that too much, because we can lose the balance, because what economic output tends to do is to people exist for systems, and community participation is about belief that systems exist for people and establishing that balance. So I just wanted to. Yeah, but I love all your presentations. Really great. Thanks.
Dennis, now you had to that. My perspective, and this is what I generally look at it, if it wasn't for people like me,
Thanks.
Yeah, that's right, you're welcome.
Thank you. Talking about recognition of the problem, the funding point of view from the top level. They got no recognition. HLD got some sort of recognition. They must have had some recognition because of work they've done. Cancer must have had some recognition because of work they've done. Why is the largest problem on the planet from politicians that's in bureaucracy?
Stigma and shame, secrecy. People are, I mean, I have to say, and it's cultural change too, you know. I remember being on these forums when I was a baby fag and talking about HIV, and we were in the same position. No one was, and so it's taken a long time to get heard, but that's because people came out, literally came out. And I find when I disclose that I'm someone who's living successfully with a mental health condition, anxiety and depression, people are like, but then I say, oh, I identify as an injection drug user, they're, oh, how could you do that? You know, and I'm passionate that I'm going to say it because it's true. It is true, and more people should say it. The other thing I'm passionate about is I won't ever sit on a panel with all men ever again.
But I have to say a few words because Tori slipped over from excellent in saying, and I'm sure Lawrence is going to acknowledge that, into the panel role. So can I, on your behalf, thank everybody on the panel and the audience for really thoughtful questions. And if you could show your appreciation of the panel members and indeed the speakers earlier, and I'll hand over to Lawrence just for concluding remarks. Thanks,
Hi there.
You're coming out.
Look, I think there's not much I have to say today in relation to, I think it's been a very enlightening discussion. I think that, you know, the importance of this subject is just critical. And I made the comment to a number of people at the beginning of the seminar that it was, in some ways for us, really disappointing that there weren't some other organisations here who could have really had a lot of value from hearing what's here, because in lots of ways it's, you know, it's like the old sort of cliche about preaching to the converted. I think everybody in this room is very much behind the process of how important the participation of people who are using services is in developing and taking those services forward. I did want to say one comment, you know, in relation to the discussion that was had before that I think is really important. That you know, when you come to talking about funding, yes, it's really easy to have consumer participation processes or programs in a particular thing. Government or whoever else is funding it can look at and say it's not really necessary, we'll take that away. So I think that's where it's really important, is the integration of these sorts of programs into our core business. And what I mean by core business is that you know, the government is now moving away from block funding of services, saying you get this much money, more into an EFT-based basis or an effective full-time position. And just as when we look at the effective full-time position makeup for a position, whether it be $95,000 or $80,000 or whatever, one of the components, just like the vehicle or the on costs or whatever else, we need a component in that effective full-time that says participation process, so not be and defunded through this sort of process. And again, shows that it is as important as the vehicle or the office or whatever else, that the mobile phone that the person has in their role. That's really, you know, part of it too, is that is a rethink in terms of recognising what are the core components in terms of that makes these sort of services work. So, as I said, you know, yes, there's been so much of importance said today. I think it comes back to, you know, one of my summary comments is that this information will be available on our website. It will be available. People want to look at it on the process. You can go back and have a look at those things. I'm sure the slideshows will be made available to on our website as well. So that will be all available. To just say, also, my iPad turns around so I can read the right way around. You know, we've tried to keep this event easily accessible and to maximise the opportunities to participate in questions. But, you know, certainly I hope that, you know, there will be that ongoing opportunity through some of the chats and the forums that continue on after this event. As Tora said before, you know, the important thing is that we've provided people with an evaluation form. Please fill that in, because that is really important to us in helping us be able to put on these sorts of events, but also to put on events that are really useful to people within this sector. I do have a number of thank yous to say today, and obviously I'd like to thank the panel and all the other speakers as well for their participants. It's certainly, you know, we try to make this as broad as possible. We don't like to just sort of put on a ReGen event to say, oh, come in here how great ReGen is, and all the good things that, you know, we know we do a lot of good things, mind you, but we like to provide a bit of a balanced view and something that is useful to the whole field and sector, and people who are interested in these areas. I also want to say a special thank you to Tora for emceeing this. I think, you know, you've done a wonderful job, and I feel so much more relieved now that you know, we've got another person in the area that I can just sit down and relax and listen to everything everybody says rather than. I do have some acknowledgements for the. Is this it, Paul? That's the. So, Carla, I have a t-shirt you can go and wear in New South Wales, so that you do spread the message of. Thank you. So, thank you all for participating. Okay, so again, it would also be remiss of me not to thank all the ReGen staff who have assisted in putting this event together today, and yeah, from various things, from the catering, the general running, and of course the PowerPoints and all the other areas. So if you could give everybody a warm thank you for that. And forward to seeing and hearing from you again in one of our other forums. So thanks everybody for coming today.
Thank you. Okay.